I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we dive into some pretty crazy cases. And one of the craziest cases that I have ever covered, of course, bubbled up right here in Northwest Florida in the Destin area. And if you've followed some of our previous episodes talking about basically doctors behaving badly, this is one of the latest episodes to sort of join that grouping. I'm here with Pam Hill, as always. She is a pharmacist and an advocate for victims. She's experienced violent crime in her own family. And of course, we're going to rely on her medical knowledge and expertise as we discuss this next episode, which is an update on Thomas Shiknowski. He's the doctor from Destin, Florida. If you're not familiar with Destin, Florida, it's a beautiful part of the Panhandle. I'm a little, of course, prejudiced, and I love Pensacola. I think we have the beautifulest beaches in the whole wide world. Yes. But they have some beautiful beaches, of course, in Destin as well, and it's that emerald water. And it's a resort town. Lots of celebrities have properties there. They vacation there. Just a lot of regular folks as well. So this is the environment that Dr. Shiknowski is practicing in at this hospital there in Miramar Beach, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Destin. And basically, Dr. Shiknowski he's accused of mistakenly removing a man's liver when he was supposed to be removing his spleen. And this was Mr. Bill Bryan. We've talked about this in previous episodes of Gulf Coast Confidential. I interviewed his widow, I interviewed his attorney, and they identified Dr. Shiknowski as the one who mistakenly removed Bill Bryan's liver, which led to his death. Because you can't live without your liver, y'all. Causes catastrophic damage. The largest vein in the body, I think, carrying blood to and from the heart to the liver. Anyway, that's what he severed, and the poor man bled out. And there is a new report, which we're talking about in this episode, that we're calling That's the Effing Liver. Florida investigates doctor accused of mistakenly removing man's liver. And so That's the Effing Liver is actually a quote directly from the Agency for Healthcare Administration's investigative report into Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast, where the surgery performed, and Shiknowski was a surgeon. So Pam and I are going to go through this. If you're familiar with the Ben Brown case at all, then you know that we've done this with his suspension reports from the Florida Department of Health. He received an emergency suspension. He's the plastic surgeon who was arrested for manslaughter for accidentally, apparently, he says, overdosing his wife. So we will find out that. We actually went to a hearing on his case this week right here in Milton, Florida, because it happened in Santa Rosa County, which is right next to Pensacola. He had a pretrial hearing. Nothing really happened. His attorney, Mark O'Mara, appeared virtually from Orlando. It appeared, but he was on the go. We never did get a full look at his face.
I think we saw his, left ear, right ear.
It felt very like a Picasso painting, like a close-up of different face parts. Right. Yeah, exactly. There you go. So at any rate, his case has been put off till after the first of the year. So we'll hopefully have more on Ben Brown then. But we also have done this with Shiknowski because the state of Florida has suspended his license as well. Ben Brown's partially suspended. Shiknowski, it's a full suspension. And now we have this report from the Agency for Healthcare Administration talking about what they found when they interviewed the staff in the OR. And I feel like that's a question that a lot of people have been asking. How did this happen? This is why it's one of the craziest stories that I've ever covered. It's definitely picked up viewers and readers, if you will, all across the globe. And I think it just has that, you've got to be kidding me.
It is.
What happened? How do you take a man's liver? That's like the basic knowledge you would expect a surgeon to have, where your body parts are.
Yeah.
And so this report gets into a lot of these details. It talks to every single person that basically was in the operating room with him when this happened. So we're just going to go through this report for you. And I'm going to let Pam take it over here for a second. But before we do that, I'll just tell you this first line pretty much right out the gate. The state of Florida says at the time of this survey, because they went in during 10 days in September 10th through the 20th, they were there basically doing what they called an unannounced complaint survey for allegations for a complaint. And there's a number, and we don't have that complaint, but the details of the report indicate it's certainly about Mr. Bill Bryan and other cases. They found that he had made other errors, and one of those actually led to another death. So we're going to get into that. But again, lead kickoff of this report, at the time of the survey, deficient practice was identified. And so this report basically lays out why they think there was deficient practice.
Right.
And there's a lot to go over.
Oh, there definitely is. And we'll just try to keep up with each other's pages.
Sounds good.
But
what stuck out to you?
Well, and here, what has been on my mind the whole time, and I think I've said this over and over, did somebody in there not just go, what the heck, type of thing, or, that's not the side you're supposed to be on, or you're on the wrong side of the patient, or whatever. But so some of that, well, a lot of that is in this report, because with the Department of Health, we didn't hear what all the other people that were in the operating room had to say.
It's more of a sterile analysis.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
This says what they said. It's very raw. It's unedited. We've even had one to say, that's the liver.
Yeah, that's the effing liver, but it's
right,
F
but
blank,
the word,
blank, blank. Yeah.
So that, and then we found out who other folks are in there. But what this report does for me is that it just validates what I was already thinking, that the staff there, there's a hierarchy in healthcare. He's a surgeon, and people probably weren't pushing back on him. That doesn't mean they're not professionals and that they didn't try to do the right thing and stuff. He's the biggest voice in the room. He's going to be heard. He's going to be the gong, like that. So they were all trying to do the right thing, and we're going to go through that by each person here. But so what that did was that just... It's what I thought already there. And that somebody did say, what the type of thing. But it also shows, like I said, how hierarchies are, how policies and procedures are, how risk management comes in and tries to twist things around, and the redundancy of saying, well, why didn't you do this? Because I'm not surgeon A. And that's what Shagnovsky is in this report.
Yes, they don't identify anybody by name.
Right.
And this report, by the way, is publicly available. If you want to read it yourself, you certainly can. But yeah, Shagnovsky, who we know because I've interviewed the widow and her attorney, Joe Zarzar, and they identified him as Shagnovsky, but he is essentially Surgeon A, because Surgeon A is the guy that mistakenly removes the liver, among many other errors. Apparently.
And also in here you see there was a Surgeon K, there was a CMO, a Chief Medical Officer, a charge nurse, some surgical techs, all that kind of stuff. So so we don't get ahead of ourselves, we'll just go through that. But basically these were interviews with the staff, and that they found the discrepancies, and that the hospital failed to ensure the operative report was complete and accurate. And that is kind of a low bar. It should be complete and accurate and done in a timely manner. But we're also going to see through here where poetic license and outright Pinocchio Joe.
Oh, yes,
so
yes. And I thought about that too when I was reading this report, and I even thought about that with the Florida Department of Health report as well. Sometimes when you realize the case that they're talking about, you're like, my gosh, this is so sterile. This is such an understated way to look at this. Yeah, he didn't fill out the report properly, but my God, this man's dead. But basically they're building a case.
Right.
If you broke the law, which law did you break, and how did you break it? So it's a sterile way of getting to it. But in this report, the AHCA report, they do talk a lot about how he was basically confronted with the fact, and we'll get into these details in a second, that he had removed the liver, but he didn't ever change it. He had put a different narrative in the operative report. He basically said that he had removed the spleen and an artery bled, and he couldn't control the bleeding. And he used clamps, and it didn't work, and he ended up dying. There was nothing that could be done to save this man. And even 2 days after, pathologists basically said, no, that's not spleen tissue you sent me. That's liver tissue. That's when he realized that it was a liver. But even then, he never changed the operative report. He never mentioned liver. He never mentioned the complications that led to the fact that he opened this man up. Because just to recap, this was supposed to be a laparoscopic surgery, more minimally invasive. But according to him and according to the staff in this report, he gets in there And he was an hour late, by the way. I think we mentioned that in previous episodes, but they reiterate that this hospital doesn't really, according to the staff, do these splenectomies, these spleen removals very often, that he has not done one personally in several years and maybe one in the last 3 or 4 years and far few before that. So you're talking about a hospital environment as well as a surgeon who this is not a common occurrence. This is not a common type of surgery. So they're already starting later in the day. He shows up late. The OR staff is saying that there was an eerie feeling, and that's easy to say, I'm sure, in hindsight as well, but that they did feel that way for all the reasons I just stated. They knew that this wasn't common type surgery. They had some hesitancy, as we learn, about Sheknovsky and wondering about his level of experience. But anyway, as they continue to watch him, they said that he was putting that camera down in there and he saw that he had what's called a megacolon, which is an enlarged colon, and there was a little bit of blood in there, he said. So it was hard for him to see the spleen, which was the target, the organ that needed to be removed. So he cuts him open, and then they say that basically, and you can jump in anytime because one of the nurses that was texted to say, please, we could use another set of hands, please come in and look. She sees through the window what I'm about to describe to you, which was basically this megacolon bursting from his stomach when he cut him open. A lot of colon there. And he's looking for the liver. I mean, excuse me, he's looking for the spleen, essentially. He's standing on the opposite side of the body, and he tells the state investigator that he's standing there because he basically has better visibility, better reach.
He's got a direct whatever toward it. And it was, I think he knew that it was the liver the minute he did it because he came back in.
He just committed to the stay, of course.
Oh, it's just deny, and just push, because remember, he came back in the room not once, not twice, but 3 times to announce that it was a ruptured spleen.
Right. And going to that, that's the impression that I got, is this all happened fairly quickly. So he has this full OR staff there. They each have their designated duties to perform. One of them is handing him equipment. One of the nurses or techs has, and I'm not sure which person this was, but I do know that one of the persons whose job was to hand him some equipment said that she had a clamp ready because that's what you would need for an actual splenectomy to hold an artery, or as part of the surgery, basically.
Because of the bleeding, she offered him some Kelly clamps because a good assistant, a good nurse, a good tech, they can read your mind. They've done it so often, they know to have it there. There doesn't have to be a whole lot of talking. She offered him Kelly clamps. He didn't clamp anything. He said he did, but he didn't clamp anything.
Right. And that's important because, again, they wanted to show what he could have done to perhaps mitigate this, and none of these steps were taken, and it certainly wasn't documented in his operative report. But the scenario, the way that the staff described that it went down, is after he cut him open, visibility didn't get any better because this megacolon burst. There's a little bit of blood there. There's still blood there at the time. And he just starts to go in and cut towards the area that I guess he thought was the spleen and turned out to be the liver. And then blood starts and they can't see. And there's literally a line in this report that said he has a belly full of blood. And
a lot of blood.
And a lot of blood and this enlarged megacolon, this enlarged colon, and visibility is nil. And they said again that he blindly goes in with a stapling device, which is essentially a cutting device. And he said to the investigators that he thought, well, if I just keep cutting, if I can get this out, then maybe we'll have a better shot of starting the bleeding. So bleeding starts, he doesn't stop, the patient starts to code, they're doing CPR, the staff is taking turns and rotations, basically doing chest compressions while he's in there still, quote unquote, blindly.
Right. And he didn't call the code either. I think the CRNA had to call the code. So he's just doing his own thing. That's what makes me think, was he impaired when he came in there? He came in an hour and a half late, schedules this surgery at 4:00 in the afternoon, which is not typical. That's the end of a shift. Even if they're working 7A to 7P, that's the end of a 12-hour shift. There's just chaos with him, and everybody's trying to settle down and do what's next. But he's just going to do what he wants to do. And that blindly stuff, you don't do anything blindly. He wouldn't call any timeouts. He didn't
consult with anyone, didn't ask for help. And one of the things in this report that it basically finds is that they asked the staff a lot about why they didn't report concerning behavior. There were different incidences involving Sheknovsky. There were other things that had happened, and we'll talk about that. But basically they say, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you say more? There's a reporting process in place. And essentially they didn't feel comfortable. And I think that we can talk a little bit about that. Perhaps it certainly smacks of a toxic environment or an environment where you don't expect to be heard, or you expect worst case scenario, some sort of retribution, you know. And I don't know that they felt any of that. That's not directly addressed in this, but basically they give these reasons for, well, I didn't report it. And Aka says, well, that's part of the problem. This is why patients aren't as safe as they could be, because you didn't report it and basically make people aware. And I thought, well, way to put it off on the staff.
Way to miss the whole point.
Right.
And
then what's wrong with the environment that they don't feel comfortable talking?
Well, that makes me upset.
And also, they were doing their jobs.
Right. What makes me upset, everybody can't be the surgeon. He's the surgeon. It is up to the surgeon or the doctor or the person doing the surgery there, that there's got to be a team leader and a head there.
Right.
And he sets the environment. I don't like them going back and say, why didn't you do it? Put all your questions back on him and go, why do you not know the difference between a liver and a spleen? Because that is very basic. That is a basic just tenet that the surgeon should know the difference between organs. When he's in over his head, you ask for someone else. There was another surgeon in the room too. But see, if you've got somebody with the Messiah complex and they're a big old bully and they're a big old egomaniacal person, yeah, they said they felt eerie. It might be because they never feel crossing their fingers with this guy. Because if that's not something, not just something he doesn't do, this hospital doesn't do a lot of them.
So it seems, yes. And we don't know. This is just this. And I did reach out to Ascension Sacred Heart, Emerald Coast, and I did not hear back. But in previous attempts to talk to them, I was successful. And this case in particular about Chiknovsky, and they said they don't comment on ongoing investigations, but they're sympathetic to the Bryan family and they are committed to patient safety. So I do want to say that. And this is just based on these findings that we see in this report. But, you know, I think I've never worked in a hospital. You've certainly worked around doctors and medical staff, but I think a lot of people can relate to having a hierarchy.
Right.
And if you're, you know, as a reporter just starting out in a newsroom, or even if been there a few years, I'm not going to walk up to the anchor. I'm not going to walk up to the general manager and say, you know, you really need to change the way you're doing things, because they're going to laugh. They're not going to take you seriously. And I'm not saying that it's that level, because I don't know. I've not worked in a hospital, but there is some exchanges between the investigator and the staff saying, well, why, how do you feel? Do you feel comfortable reporting? Would you have felt comfortable stepping in and saying, hey, we're not sure you're doing the right thing here. Can you stop? And this one tech said, you know, I'm a tech. He goes, I'm not going to tell a surgeon what to do. They're not going to listen to me. No surgeon's ever going to listen to a tech.
Well, and part of that should be a learning thing for the hospital. I hate that it's at someone's expense. But why are you asking them over and over, why didn't you put in error report or whatever? Obviously, they didn't feel like they could. They couldn't even in the moment go, you're fixing to kill him.
Right.
You know, so the fact that they asked that, there's always risk management. There's always mitigating the damage. There's, there's always that when any adverse event happens. But in this, if there's 6 or 7 people in there and him, and everybody else is having to stay timid because of him, that tells me that he is the problem, or an individual like him is the problem. This ain't nothing new. We went through this with Ben Brown.
I know. It's
this is not nothing new.
I was going to reach out to them too and see if they'd done their own report on some of his issues.
Right. Well, see, and then this was scheduled. Basically, the nurse that had walked past the operating room where they were, she just told straight up, she said, I just being nosy. I was peeking in. I saw the megacolon from the hallway through the glass. So, and then I'm sure everybody else scrubbed in. I've never worked in a hospital like that. My mom was a scrub nurse, so I've heard that from my mom for 30 or 40 years, and they're doing arteriograms and venograms. And my mother, they empowered her to say, she could say that she wasn't afraid of them, but she didn't work in that kind of environment. UAB encourages a lot of this, teaching hospital. And
communication, basically.
They value the other professionals. And I just think that's so disrespectful to go in there and your patient's laying there just like a lamb. And you're just
they're as helpless as can be.
And you're not going to rest before you come in. You're not going to come in on time. You're not going to be respectful to your other teammates and everything. That's very selfish. But guess who pays for it? The patient and the other healthcare professionals, because he put them in a hell of a mess.
He sure did. And I know everyone in that room. Just the reactions are terrible.
Yep. And so this sort of risk management, asking them questions too, of course, with the ACA report. And I noticed after every single interview, they said, well, did you file a report? And they say no. And they say why? And they basically say what you just said. I had never done one, or I didn't feel like I could, or this, that, and the other. So if everybody to the person, and these are educated people, that they got so sick when this happened that they wanted to throw up.
Yes, like you talked about, he certainly should have recognized the liver. When he removes it, when he comes up from this belly full of blood and colon, and he puts the specimen, as they described it in the report, on the table, basically one of the nurses said, I felt sick to my stomach. We were still doing chest compressions, and I saw and I recognized from across the room, I'm right there on the table, that it was a liver. And she said, and I felt sick to my stomach because I knew there was nothing we could do to save this man, that he was going to bleed to death.
And in healthcare, you notice things like color, size, shape, texture. She said, I saw it was 3-lobed, and I saw the indentation where the gallbladder would have been underneath. And so, and they saw what side he was on. But I mean, when you create such a fear in people to where they can't say, may I ask why you're on the opposite side of the table? They take that as an affront instead of someone helping. Wouldn't it be wonderful if someone could take advisement from anybody and everybody in there? I'm not talking about somebody that goes, why are you using the left hand instead of your right hand or something like that? But even then, sometimes if a person's right-handed. But there's nothing wrong with people asking questions or holding you to a higher standard to where you make sure this man doesn't die.
Yes, and they do get into that. I think even the staff felt that way. You know, when I reported on this for the Pensacola News Journal, that was one of the quotes that I all but ended on, was one of the staff saying, I just want the family to know. Here, I'll read it to you real quick.
Okay.
But it broke my heart because I felt like they did. These people who are in healthcare, they care about people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. It's a lot of sacrificing. It's not the best hours. But this one staff member told the investigator, quote, we want the family to know the truth. Never thought I would see something like this. This is a huge learning moment for everybody and prevent this from happening again from incompetency, end quote.
Right. And I just really don't have a big problem with them saying we had an eerie feeling, because you kind of know when you're around people that are not behaving right. God gives you intuition for a reason, and that I think you should honor intuition. And like I said, this is behavior. I want to think that he does know the difference between organ A and organ B, that either there's something going on in his life, there's some impairment, or there's some grandiosity, or there's some mental illness, or there's some bad decision making. But if you bad decision making, now if you're out here and we're doing napkin folding and you fold a napkin wrong, no big deal.
Right.
Are we doing underwater pony riding? It don't matter. But when you are operating on people, it matters.
The consequences are huge. Well, I'd like to get into a little bit about the surgical errors that were involving Dr. Shiknowski. According to the ACA report, they said that they found from May of 2020 to August of 2024, so just a couple months ago, the hospital identified 3 surgical errors. All 3 involved Dr. Thomas Shiknowski. And, again, it doesn't name Shiknowski, but we know it's him because it's the same surgeon who removed the liver on accident. The report says that the first surgical error happened in May of 2023. I've reported on this before for the Pensacola News Journal. We've also talked about it in our last episode on Shiknowski. But you talk about, you would hope that he would know the difference between the organs. And this is why I also wanted to go over this, because it does show this pattern of, they even say it in their report, poor judgment, or not necessarily poor judgment, but questionable decision making. And is it but it was more towards post-operative care and management as opposed to his surgical acumen. But I can't help but wonder if it doesn't go to a surgical acumen too when I read these errors. So this is one that we've touched on before. May 2023, he removed a portion of a 58-year-old person's pancreas instead of his adrenal gland. So another wrong site surgery there. The second surgical error, according to the report, happened in August of 2023, so a year before Mr. Bryan died, when a patient was found to have a bowel perforation, so a little cut, after a partial colectomy where they removed part of the colon. and it led to a fatal infection that killed the patient. So that was the other error that led to a death that was involving Dr. Shiknowski, according to his report. And a year later, of course, in August 2024, we had Bill Bryan die after his liver was removed. But then the report goes on to say, and this I think is another reason why they kept asking the staff about reporting, that there were 2 additional patients with possible surgical errors by Shiknowski that had not been investigated. They were discovered through these staff interviews. So in April of this year, Aka says the doctor was observed to sever what's called the common bile duct when removing a patient's gallbladder. So he said he severed a patient's
Ureter.
or tube that carries urine from the kidneys to the bladder, and that resulted in a urologist having to be called to the OR for repairs. So anyway, there was the Medical Staff Performance Improvement Committee. Apparently they did like a public information request, if you will, or I don't know if they have to go through public information. I'm sure that's not how they gather it like I do. But they do reference that in this ACA report that they had emails between basically different administrators, and that they saw that the Medical Staff Performance Improvement Committee had identified concerns about Shiknowski and a quote-unquote pattern of questionable decision-making. But like I was saying earlier, it was related more to post-operative management and complications and less about his surgical technique. So you can certainly see why the state investigators had questions. It's a natural follow-up, but like you, I felt like taken in totality of the whole report, I'm like, can we not lay this on the feet of people not reporting? Come on now. And this is why I want to get into it a little bit, talking about how traumatizing it was for the staff that were there when it happened. When the investigators were saying, you know, what did you see and how did you react and what did you say? And she said, well, when another surgeon came in the room, a different one, and wanted to know what happened, she said, I know I told him something, but I couldn't even remember what I said because I was trying so hard to keep it together and not cry. And the chief medical examiner officer that you mentioned earlier, he was also summoned to the OR after Brian's death. And the staff told the investigator that he appeared shocked and that he was wide-eyed when he saw Shiknowski say that was the spleen that had been removed from the patient. And another person that the state interviewed said that he heard a woman in the OR say, "That's the fucking liver." And that, of course, pardon my French, but that's what she said.
And she was at the feet of the patient too, I think. She wasn't right up on him. And that is the problem. That is the whole problem. He has created a culture of fear, and they're trying their best in there to help him. But also in here, what we found out is when he had these previous things, that he was given some little instruction or coached or counseled or whatever. Go take this CME, continuing medical education type of thing, or and so he did. But then also I saw on here where his score was about 38 or 40, and then so I think he took it again and got the score up there. But the point is, it just says that he completed it. It didn't say he learned anything from it, or it didn't say we're helping teach. You don't get to do surgery anymore. If you do not know basic anatomy, go do counseling, go do research, go do something else, but don't do this. And I just can't help it. I get so mad. I'm sitting here mad because of what he put the patients through, the patient's family, and the staff through. And they're asking, damn it to hell, why didn't you write a report? I'm traumatized. Why haven't y'all taken him out of rotation? He shouldn't even be in here. And hopefully the hospital will have some sort of thing. You know, I keep telling you, all I know is pharmacy. I know when we have an adverse event, we stop and we figure it out. And then we have what's called continuous quality improvement, because we don't want to keep making the same mistake. We don't want our technicians shaking in fear. Sometimes that technician that's standing right by you can say, hey, did you pull the right drug? Because you could have been distracted. There people yelling in the drive-through, stuff happening, understaffed, all kind of stuff. I always listen to staff because they're not dummies. They're intelligent. They've been doing that job too. So, I mean, when you create this me over here and you all are over there, you are always going to have problems.
And that is definitely the picture that I feel like is painted. And one thing that bothered me too when they were talking about what happened in the OR, and I'm not sure if it was the chief medical officer or another surgeon, but basically the staff are telling him, Shiknowski's still there, and he turns and he says to Shiknowski, you know, what happened? And basically said, well, I removed the spleen, and he never corrected him.
Mm-mm.
He said he just kind of, he goes, I looked at him kind of wide-eyed, like, and then just, but never confronted. And there was just this, in my opinion, reading it, and then there were other details in the report as well, but it was like they were all just waiting for the pathologist to confirm it instead of confirming what everybody knew right there in the room. And the one person said it's the fucking liver.
Right.
Not even the CMO said it. Not even the other surgeon said it that we know of that's reported in here. It's almost like, well, let's just wait and see what the pathologist
Let's see
said.
if we get caught.
Well,
is
that's
what it
how
is.
it came across to me.
I don't care what nobody says. But here's what happened in the interim. In the interim, he goes out there. This is making me upset. He goes out there and tells Miss Bryan that the freaking thing migrated or this, that, and the other. That is not right. When you do something wrong, like kill somebody, or you cut out a part of their body they got to have to live, you better get you a lawyer, get with the other peers. The people in there, the staff, they were smart enough to text, we need some more hands.
Yes.
Or we need the CMO. Or we need the charge
And they had
nurse.
the equipment ready.
Yeah.
They were handing it to him, but he wouldn't take some of what they were offering.
I'm going to go down swinging all this. You're not going to blame the other people in the room when you've created this toxic environment and all the chaos and disregard for a patient's life and their family and the staff that's in there. I'm so mad I could spit nails.
Well, and I had forgotten about that, but that's exactly what he did. He left and he told Mrs. Bryan, Beverly Bryan, that the organ had migrated. And at the same time, he'd gone back into the operating room 3 different times and insisted to the staff, telling the same story, that it was the spleen that he removed and he had died from splenic aneurysm and that there was nothing that could be done to save him. And one of the nurses told the investigator, it's like he came in and it was like if he could say it, repeat it over and over again, somehow we would just believe it.
It's called gaslighting, and it's called bullying, and it's called lying. It's just all that. He's got a heck of a road ahead of him because this is all wrong. And I mean, basically, the operative notes, they say in here also, we start at the very least that the operative notes are accurate and complete. That means they're not a lie and they're done in a timely way. Now, he didn't go back and make any addendums or mark on there because he's too much thought. I just feel like he thought he's going to get away with this.
I think he did too. And then basically the medical examiner, the report also talks about how they talked to the medical examiner and said, how did you get alerted to this case? And as we know from previous reports, basically the pathologist called. But before that, she said that they had been told that Mr. Bryan had died, but it was due to a cyst on his spleen. So they didn't investigate the case, basically. But then when the pathologist said, hey, I didn't get a spleen, they sent me a liver, so they do the autopsy, and she tells the state investigator that it's hard even for a medical examiner to effectively and accurately, not accurately, but basically smoothly remove the liver because of where it is. And she said it's hard for even a medical examiner, but that he did it, he precisely removed the liver and autopsied that liver right out of that man, quote unquote, was what she said.
See, and that is that gives me an eerie feeling because I'm like, he's alive. There's no need to do an autopsy on someone. When you are in over your head, I don't care what it is, especially though if you're doing surgery or someone's health or anything like that that is that significant. Everybody's been taught to stop. You don't further do extra harm, do no harm. It doesn't say, see if you can stay in there and do extra harm.
Right. Well, and to your point about this us and them sort of distance between the hierarchies, they asked staff what they thought about Szygnowski, what his reputation was, what they'd heard about him, what the general feelings were. And some staff described him as quote unquote well-intentioned, quote unquote respected. Others said they quote unquote don't trust him as a doctor. And one nurse even said, quote, everyone knows he's not a good surgeon, end quote, and that staff would not bring their family to the hospital if Szygnowski was on call because he was so quote unquote cavalier it made him dangerous.
Exactly.
End quote.
Right. And I also read in there where he almost had this like Oscar, what's his name, like Flounder off of Animal House, like playing loud and being boisterous and grab-assy during where they have the timeouts in there.
Right.
So I mean, he just doesn't think the rules apply to him.
Right. And that goes back to, again, why the staff would say, here's the quote, or whether investigators would say this report, quote, staff's failure in reporting concerns with competency led to the hospital's failure in identifying opportunities to improve patient health outcomes, end quote. That sounds like an attorney thing to me.
Yeah.
That's what that sounds like. How can we cover our ass?
It's legal talk.
And not blame the hospital for allowing the surgeon with all these problems and errors to continue operating.
Right.
And that's my concern, because here you have, what if that had been you or me or one of our family members, and they're stuck on vacation someplace, having health problems, really want to go back home. The doctor insists you stay, basically tell them you're declining. You need to go ahead and have the surgery. You don't have time to wait. So the Bryan family agrees despite the fact that they don't want to. There's no way that you can access a website that says, let me just check on this surgeon real quick and see what his history is. I mean, let me tell you, I can promise you the Bryans probably would have insisted on a different surgeon.
Yeah, if they
had a quarter of an insight to what we see in this. And that has nothing to do with staff failing to report concerns.
No.
That has everything to do with the doctor. Even the doctor, the hospitals, they knew that he had issues. They knew that he had done wrong site surgeries before. And even one of the nurses says, I can't believe he was allowed to come back.
I think sometimes that they do that because they don't want to get sued by that particular surgeon.
I think so too.
For saying, you're limiting my income or this, that, and the other, and you better prove that. That's the whole thing. You know how I keep saying it through all this time. I keep saying, where was peer review? Where was peer review? Where was peer review? That is a way of self-discipline and self-governing. And it's like if we're doing something together, say in pharmacy, and there's a pharmacist doing stuff that is not our standard of practice, or talking to patients any old kind of way, or not being kind or considerate and stuff. As a peer, you're going to talk to them. You're not going to try to, cause problems in their life, but they don't get to do that. That is what keeps you a professional. So I don't want them blaming the staff. There are people that credential the people that work in every hospital. But sometimes those credentialing periods go 2 or 3 years. Well, I'm a component. I mean, a proponent of a component too. Now I'm so flustered. Of behavior. Behavioral contracts are becoming a thing now because we're so stressed that we kind of do these weird things now that are just as bad as coming in drunk or high.
Right. And people are like, I don't want to put up with it. Well, we're going to continue to follow this. I also want to mention that the state of Alabama has also suspended his license. They didn't give an explanation for it, but that comes on the heels, as we talked about earlier, of Florida suspending Szygnowski's license. So also just a reminder, the Walton County Sheriff's Office is also investigating possible criminal charges against Szygnowski. We saw it with Ben Brown. People didn't know that if he was going to be charged criminally, even though the state of Florida had partially suspended his license. And then Santa Rosa County investigators took a hard look at it, and they felt like there was manslaughter charges were appropriate, that there was some negligence involved in the care. We'll see if that proves out in court. Of course, Ben Brown has denied that, says he's not guilty. And I don't know yet if Szygnowski will face any criminal charges, but like I said, we've seen the precedent. Certainly, Beverly Bryan wants to see criminal charges. She doesn't ever want to see him practicing again. So a lot going on with this case. This is the very latest. Pam, thank you so much for going over this report with me.
Welcome.
If you want to see it, again, it's going to be online on ACA's website, but I'll also post a link to my Facebook page if you want to find that. That's Molly Barrows. I got a couple of them. You'll know the difference between my personal one. It's me and my baby girl. And then, of course, I have one that's a professional one as well. But at any rate, it's interesting reading, and we're going to continue to follow this case, and we appreciate you joining us for this episode of Gulf Coast Confidential called That's the Effing Liver. Florida investigates doctor accused of mistakenly removing a man's liver. And I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. And remember, you can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And you can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Just don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.